Hey everyone, and welcome back to the basics of character design in illustration. Today's chapter is chapter 15, creating design iterations. So in the previous chapter, as always, a quick recap, we really zoomed into the design details. We took a very close look at what our current drafts are at, and then we focus on several things, including finer detailing. We basically making use of this kind of closer zoom, this kind of closer attention to deal with things like creases, texture, reflectivity, all these things that are very relevant when we're designing characters, right? Unless we're only designing characters who are not wearing any clothing, and then the material will be very simple. However, most of the time character design comes with designing, their clothing, their accessories, and all these different things. And so when we are drawing all these different things, what happens is that we need to take care of things that basically exist in the real world, right? Because we want to make our characters convincing, we want to make our characters feel somewhat realistic, at least to the extent where, they can be believed, right? Someone can look at a character and think, oh, that's cool. I believe that this character can exist and I am kind of immersed in this character's story, right? So the final detailing and adding the complexity to the forms where it's relevant, it serves this purpose. Of course, I also demonstrated working with patterns, right? How you can create your own pattern very quickly and then use some very simple techniques to apply them to the character design in a very controlled manner that you such that you can reuse the texture elsewhere. You can manage how the texture is applied in a very controlled manner. So this was a simple demonstration that I did, but I think so much of this character design is up to you in terms of the demonstration. I can't sit here and give you guys and say, okay, these are all the best designs in the world. Like, just go for it. It doesn't really work that way because the best character designs, the most unique ones, they come from you yourself. So in essence, right, up until the previous chapter, our mission of sort of conveying the basics of character design and illustrating out that character design is kind of complete, right? We went through a lot of the initial stuff all the way from the reference gathering, right, to understanding the importance of reference. And then we went over to the preparation, right, in terms of sketching out our ideas and then gathering the reference for that. And then we went on to draw our 4 characters, right, plus one bonus one in the form of the extra character that I drew for the freestyle character theme. And then we went over to do the feedback. And then we did a bit of detailing and talking about how to sort of finish things off. So all this knowledge together, essentially, we are kind of like an almost complete package. So you might be thinking, right, what are we doing for this chapter? So for this chapter, what we're going to do is to iterate on a design. Now that we have learned how to create a design that is good, now how to add on details to a design, let us talk about how to create additional variants for exploration. So many times, I think the key that makes up what a good design is, right, as I mentioned, quite a bit ago, that only one of those, if you recall, back in the chapter 3, we talked about what makes up a good design, and only one of the points is really about technical execution. So you might think, okay, I need to draw everything in very fine detail. And of course, if you are able to do so, that will be very, very cool, right? If you're exceptionally talented in that, right, and you really, really draw something in superb amounts of detail, certainly that would make it, it's a boon to how well your artwork will be received. However, at the same time, right, so many categories, I feel there are so many other areas where you can use to make your character a lot more appealing, more fun to draw, not only just for your audience to see, but also for yourself. So there's a lot of work, even though technique is important, right? Everything else, like finding a good theme, right? Drawing a character in meaning, enjoying the overall look of the character, right? Making things thematic, right? Adding in points of interest. All these things are even more massive boon, I think, because you can see so many great designs out there, which started off as a very rough sketch. But because of how appealing they are in these ways, right, we end up with something that is very iconic, very memorable. And so a big part of that process isn't always about just going in and finding the perfect thing. Sometimes what we need to do is also to create additional variants for exploration. So rather than just locking ourselves in on something and saying, okay, this is it, right, we're done. What we want to do is to maybe try some color variants, right? Design variants, for example, if we have in our modern character more like a biker character, right, we could try something a little bit different. For example, the character may be dressed a little bit more casually, a little bit more street fashion, right? Little design variations based on what we already established to be pretty good. So we're going to test these things out. And of course, base character variations is also possible. Let's say you have a same design, but then you want to try out a different pose. So that can certainly reveal different things as well. Next, if we talk about useful techniques, right, we want to, or other useful techniques for iterating on creating additional variants, right? What we can do is to always recall references. Perhaps we could use a reference that we use for a different character, or maybe a reference that was tangentially related to this idea, where we could take inspiration and take reference from those resources and give us ideas with which to make these variants. And of course, right, in terms of more technical technique side of things, right, color adjustment tools like selective color, like color balance, or simply hue saturation adjustment, right, these are very good tools, digital tools that we have to just kind of change color up on the fly. They're very easy, very quick, something nice and simple. And last but not least, right, these tools are tools that we have used throughout the drawing process. So by now, you guys should also be pretty familiar, right? Liquify, warp, and transform, right? These are tools that we can use to, for example, change, let's say, the silhouette in a very quick manner, that we can just kind of experiment with things in a very smooth manner. Doesn't mean that, let's say, we want a bigger coat for the character. We can just select the right part, scale that up, use warp to sort of manage the proportions a little, and then we have something that new that we can kind of look at and see if it works. So all these tools, mostly familiarized with them, but we'll continue to be using them. And if anything, it kind of proves my earlier point that so much of this process doesn't really rely on any fancy tools you have. It's really about knowing what you want to do, what you need to do, and then doing it at the right points in time. So here are some examples of iterations. Excuse the marker here. So these are examples of iterations of a character I designed before. We've seen the character in a couple of chapters ago when I used it as another example of character design. Right, in this case, this character we've drawn a couple of variations, for example, with glasses, without coat, right, with the coat, with glasses, and there are yet even more variations of the character, where we have like a dress version, which was shown to you guys earlier. So characters can come in so many different shapes and sizes that even within the same kind of design, there's a lot of space for variation and experimentation. Now, these are the characters that we have drawn so far, right? I haven't quite updated these, but each of these have a couple of newer versions up now. So you can, of course, during inner class materials, you can download them very easily. So feel free to grab them over there. But we'll be trying to create variations on some of these characters and see how it goes. So it's going to be a pretty fun time, and I'm very much looking forward to it. So yeah, without further ado, let's jump in and make some variations. Let's go. And here we are back in our design documents. So today I prepared 2 characters for our variation drawing demonstration. Now, one of them is going to be our modern character. Since we've worked on the modern character quite a bit, I figured out, might as well just kind of continue along with her and use her to demonstrate some of the concepts that, we are teaching for this lesson. So number 1 is going to be the modern character, and number 2 is going to be a fantasy character. So we'll be creating variations of this character as well. So for these 2 characters, I'm very excited to see what we can cook up. And for the rest of the characters, for example, the future character, if we do have a bit more time, I'd love to jump in and make a couple of smaller edits around here as well, just to kind of see, what we can come up with and just for a little bit of fun. So let's see where we can go with it. Now, before we jump into the demonstration for today, I am going to do one thing. There is something usually we say for the end of the class, and this time it's going to be the class exercise. It's going to be exercise 8 for chapter 15. And what I want you to do is to kind of follow along, right, with what we're doing. I want you to put down your main design here. It doesn't matter if you haven't created one yet, specifically for the class. It could be a character that you've already have drawn. So just kind of put down main design. And what I want you to do as we follow along is to create a simpler version, an alternate color version, and a complex version. So 3 different versions for it, right? So this is going to be the challenge. And this document, of course, is always available to download from the class site. I'm also going to try to follow these overarching themes, for example, a different color, a simpler version, or more complex version. Like the idea here is that what I'm trying to do is to use these essentially directions, right, to help guide ourselves. Because if we were to just jump in like without any kind of guide, maybe it's a little bit difficult to generate more ideas more effectively. But because we know what we want to do, because we know, we're pretty clear on how we want to do things. So hopefully we'll be able to move things along as quickly as possible and as efficiently as possible, right? So let us begin with our character layout over here. Let me just kind of arrange these take a little bit of time to arrange these in descending order. Okay, so we can draw them left to right, right? So for the first character here, what I want to do is to maybe create a simpler version. So with regards to a simpler version, what I mean is that what if instead of having these pens with lots of creases, well, what if we just draw the character, with, let's say, L shorts, right? But once again, right, the kind of theme here is that rather than complexify, what if, let's say, we want to simplify things? What if we go for a different design, like so? So, of course, one thing that you take note of as you, for example, draw things in, let's say, this more simplified, like you're getting rid of the larger silhouette of the character, right? You do have to pay attention to how you paint the rest of the character as well, right? For example, the knee here, I want to take note of where it is. So, of course, this is going to be a little bit rough because we're trying to do it as quickly as we can. Because once again, the idea here isn't that we are trying to create a full illustration in a different variant, right? The idea here is that we're just trying to give it a test to see how, let's say, creating a different variation, how it will look, right? How it would function, right? Would it work well, right? Would the idea work well? Would the idea stick, right? Little things like that are what we are testing for. We're not necessarily going in and saying, okay, it has to be a new idea that we are committing to 100%. So this is the beauty of drawing variations, right? Depending on how much you want to commit to it, right? You can go in and say, okay, so I kind of have a good idea what it looks like now, right? I can proceed to either reject or adopt the idea. So for me, it feels like this design, let me just kind of duplicate this layer and combine it so we can use Liquify to, once again, make our adjustments. Once again, Liquify is a really good tool because you don't really have to, repaint a lot of things, right? In order to be able to adjust things, right? We don't have to repaint all the edges here. Right? We can kind of use this tool as long as we know exactly what we are adding. We can use this tool to manage kind of the pose. Actually, in this case, I want to move the knees up a little bit. Right, we need to move the knees up a little bit like such. Right, for this, the knees a little bit lower because this leg is kind of a weight-bearing leg, right? This leg is kind of the slightly more relaxed leg. So something like this, right? If we were to reverse it, right, kind of do a little quick reverse like so, it would look something like this, right? Something pretty simple, but it will give us a good idea on whether this particular idea is workable. If we kind of take a look at the previous version, if we flip it back, right? This is with the pants, this is without. So on one hand, what I do think is that it does create a different look, right? It creates a different look in the sense that simply by changing out, what kind of pants she's wearing, what kind of lower wear she's wearing, right? It creates a very big difference in the impression it makes. So now this is the kind of time where you kind of want to look at it and go, okay, so let's give it a good try and making sure, let's say, for example, we're adding on, the little kind of frayed out bits for decoration, right? If we have this little frayed out bits, make the shadows here a little bit deeper. So if we have this kind of setup going, right, we can assess it properly, right? We can take a look at it and say, okay, so I like the design, but I think what's strong about the previous one is that if we kind of look at the upper right corner, it's a really small bit, but we can see what's going on, right? The kind of connectivity of the pose is stronger in the previous version, whereas in this particular version, it feels as if well, how do I quite put it? The silhouette or the overall shape feels a little bit broken up because we have very solid dark colors, and then our skin tone is controlled in areas very specifically. So if we were to reduce it suddenly like this, what happens is that it might give a first impression that is significantly different. So it depends on your direction, right? Let's say you want, to draw a biker character that feels maybe a little bit more carefree, right? Maybe a little bit more carefree, a little bit more casually dressed. Maybe it's a hot summer, right? Perhaps this costume design is what you're looking for, right? Perhaps this one is what you're looking for. However, let's say if you are drawing a character that maybe, you want to feel that they're more heavily dressed in a sense, right? There are more areas to show off different accessories. You can hang little accessories off here, right? You can, as previously we have drawn this kind of interlaced design, right? You can add this design in here, but all these things are possible if you, give her a larger pair of pants. Of course, right? We can also add in, for example, embroidered designs, like for example here. Right? We can add in embroidered designs here. Right? All this is possible because, right, we have something to draw it on. So for this character, right, you can consider maybe if you want to add tattoos to the character, that's one thing that you can think about, right? But in terms of making a variation, making a variant, like this alone is kind of qualifies for a different variant, right? Because of just how different it is. Even though we didn't change the color, even though we didn't do much else in this direction, right? It was a significant change. Now, let's say we're looking at this and then we go like, it doesn't really quite work for me, right? I want something different. So let's kind of move on to the next character here to see what we can do. So for this character, let's kind of keep it in this box here, this group here. It's labeled as 1. So for character number 2, let me duplicate it so we can save it. And then what I want to do here is to create a more complex version. So this is a simple version, right? How do we make this version more complex? So one way we can do it is to, let's say, add inner sleeve. So previously we removed, or rather we simplified the pants maybe. Now what we can do is to maybe we can add like an inner sleeve. So in addition to wearing this jacket, she has this, I kind of put both of these into the same group. That kind of makes sense. So this one is out here and this one is in there. Okay. So with this character, what we can do is you can add, let's say, let's create a new layer. And then we can add this piece of semi-transparent clothing here. And then what we can do is to add in flowers, the same patterns that we have on the chest area. Because we're just testing out the variation, like we don't have to be super precise with it, or we can be a little bit rougher with it. And then we can end it off with like something frilly, right? Flowery. Once again, the theme here is to make it more complex, right? So by doing this, we're making this a little more complex. Similarly for this side, right? Can do it quickly. We can do it, add a little bit of complexity to it as such. So let's say if we were to want to increase this area as well, like join up this area and make it less of a singlet, we can do it as well. So as you can see, I'm adding these frills fairly systematically rather than just drawing them very haphazardly. So if you know the shape you have in mind, right, you can do this pretty quickly. Right, we can even add it to the choker because this is the theme, like something a little bit more exaggerated, like a more complex design, right? It's kind of the goal here. And then for the pants, maybe we can even add some frills here as well. Who knows? Once again, right, the idea about this particular phase or this particular idea of iterating on stuff isn't to come up with perfect variations, right? We just want to let our drawing, want to try out our drawing, want to test out our idea, right? Or to modify it. So we test out our ideas to see if we can make something more interesting, right? Similarly for the headband, right? We can add some frills to it. Usually my character designs are pretty, well, no frill, but sometimes it's nice to add a little bit of extra. A little bit extra like this. Makes the character feel a little bit different, right? If we compare to our base character, which is a lot more simple and clear cut, versus this character, right? Which feels a little bit, frillier. So this is one way to make a variation.